If I told you that one of history's greatest murderers became one of the world's most revered saints, would you believe me? If I told you that a man who destroyed entire lives with black magic became the spiritual healer of a nation, would that change your perspective on what is possible for a human being? Today, I'm going to tell you the most impossible story of human redemption you've ever heard. A story that will prove that no matter how low you've fallen, no matter how many mistakes you've made, no matter how much darkness you carry, total transformation is possible. And by the end of this video, you'll discover the secret that enabled this complete metamorphosis. Before we dive into this extraordinary journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this isn't just a story, it's a roadmap for your own transformation. And you, yes, you who are listening to me now, may find that your life is ready for radical change too. In the icy mountains of Tibet, in the year 1052, a child was born who would carry on his shoulders both the greatest curse and the greatest blessing of an entire nation. His name was Tenzin Norbu. But the world did not yet know that he would witness the most extraordinary transformation of the human soul. Tenzin's family was not poor in material possessions. They owned land, livestock, and a respectable home. But they were rich in something far more precious: genuine love. His father, Mila Shirab Galtsen, was known for his kindness, and his mother, Nyangsa Karjan, for her quiet wisdom. Imagine, if you can, the childhood we all dream of having. A home where laughter echoed across the mountains, where every meal was a celebration, where devoted parents saw in their child not only hope for the future, but joy in the present. Tenzin grew up a special child, with eyes that seemed to see beyond the ordinary veil of reality. When he played on the snowy slopes, wild animals approached without fear. When he sang, his voice echoed through the valleys as if the heavens themselves were whispering through him. But like so many stories of saints, this one would begin with a tragedy that would break not just a heart, but an entire soul. When Tenzin was just 7 years old, death arrived at his door like a silent thief in the night. His father, the man who was his rock, his hero, his entire universe, fell suddenly and gravely ill. In the final days of his life, Shirab Galtsen called his closest wife and son. His voice, weak but still filled with love, he whispered his last words: "Take care of each other. Remember, our wealth is not in what we possess, but in the love we share." And then, like a candle snuffed out by the wind, he was gone. What happened next is a painful lesson in how greed can destroy even the most sacred bonds. Tenzin's uncle and aunt, people the family trusted completely, revealed sides no one had imagined. "Well, well," said the uncle with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Shirab left us in charge of the family estate. After all, a widow and a child can't manage such vast estates." It was a blatant lie. There was no will naming them as guardians. But who would question it? Who would protect a grieving woman and an orphan child in the isolated mountains of Tibet? Within weeks, everything was taken. The family home, the lands that generations had farmed, the herds, even the finest clothing. Tenzin and his mother were reduced to serfs on their own land, forced to work the fields that had once belonged to them. Can you imagine the agony? Seeing your mother, once respected and honored, now humiliated daily? Working under the scorching sun for people who stole not only her possessions, but her dignity. But the deepest pain came when Tenzin realized his mother was dying. Not of illness, but of heartbreak. Grief was consuming her like a slow, relentless fire. Every night she cried silently, thinking her son couldn't hear. But Tenzin heard every sob, felt every tear as if it were his own, and something dark began to grow in her young heart. "Mother," Tenzin said one night, with a determination that frightened even himself, "I will make them pay. I swear on my very soul, they will pay for every tear you've shed." Nyingsa looked into his son's eyes and saw something that terrified her. Not just anger, but a cold emptiness, as if the kindness that had always shone there was being devoured by a growing darkness. "My son," she whispered, "revenge only multiplies suffering. Your father would not approve." "My father is dead!" Tenzin exploded with a fury that made the mountain itself seem to tremble. "And look where his kindness has brought us! Look where we are now!"
It was a heartbreaking transformation. The gentle boy who sang to the birds was becoming something completely different, something dangerous. Tenzin decided he would learn magic, not the magic of healing or wisdom, but dark sorcery, destructive magic, the kind of knowledge that can shatter not just bodies, but souls. He sought out masters of the dark arts, traveled to regions few dared tread, studied texts that made strong men tremble just by opening them, and he discovered he had a terrifying natural talent for these practices. The years passed, and Tenzin mastered arts that could make mountains crumble, that could summon devastating storms, that could bring death and destruction on an unimaginable scale. But most terrifying of all, with each spell he learned, a part of his humanity died. The boy who once played with wild animals was becoming something they fled in terror from. His mother watched this transformation with growing horror. "What have you become, my son?" she asked, tears streaming down her prematurely aged face. "I became what I needed to be to protect you," he replied. But they both knew that wasn't the whole truth. He had become something that fed on his own anger, which grew with every dark thought. Finally, the day Tenzin had waited years for arrived. He was ready. His desperate mother made one last plea. "If you do this, son, there will be no going back. You will become the kind of people we despised when they stole from us." But Tenzin was beyond reason. The thirst for revenge had become an obsession that consumed every thought, every breath, every heartbeat. It was harvest time, and my uncle's entire family was gathered to celebrate abundance, an abundance built on theft and suffering of others. The house was filled with laughter, music, and joy, built on the pain of others. Tenzin positioned himself on a nearby mountain overlooking the celebration. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with grim anticipation. He began chanting incantations he had learned from the darkest recesses of human knowledge. The sky, which had been clear moments before, began to darken as clouds appeared out of nowhere. Winds began to blow with supernatural force. And then it happened. A hailstorm descended on the house as if hell itself had broken loose. But it wasn't ordinary hail. It was icicles the size of fists, falling with the force of projectiles, destroying everything in their path. The roof of the house collapsed, the walls caved in, and in this destruction, 35 people, including women, children, and the elderly, were crushed to death. When silence finally returned,
Tenzin climbed down the mountain and walked among the wreckage. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls. Blood stained the snow red. And in the center of all this devastation, he felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just an emptiness so deep it seemed to suck out your very soul. His mother found him there, standing amid the carnage. She looked into her son's eyes and saw not the boy she had loved, but a stranger, someone capable of unimaginable atrocities. "What have you done, my son?" she whispered, her broken voice echoing through the silent valley. Tenzin looked at her and, for the first time in years, saw himself through someone else's eyes, and what he saw horrified him. In the days following the massacre, something strange happened to Tenzin. He expected to feel avenged, vindicated, at peace, but instead, an indescribable anguish began to consume him. For the first few nights after the tragedy, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the victims, not just the uncles who had harmed him, but the innocent children, the young people who had barely begun to live. "Mom," he said one morning, his voice breaking, "I can't stop seeing them. They appear in my dreams, looking at me with eyes that ask, 'Why? What did we do to deserve this?'" Yangtze, who had aged decades in just a few days, responded with painful wisdom. "Son, you killed people who were innocent of your uncle's evil, children who never did you any harm. How can your heart be at peace?" And it was at that moment that something inside Tenzin began to break. Not break in anger or despair, but break like an egg ready to give birth to something completely new.
He fell to his knees before his mother and for the first time since his father's death wept. Not tears of anger or frustration, but tears of deep regret. Tears that came from a place in his soul he had forgotten existed. "Mother," he sobbed, "I have become a monster. I have become worse than those who harmed us. How can I live knowing that I took the lives of innocent people?" Nyangsa placed her hands on her son's face, hands that trembled with both age and emotion, and said something that would change the course not only of his life, but of his entire spiritual history. "Son, as long as there is life, there is the possibility of redemption. Even the darkest karma can be purified if there is true repentance and right action." "But how?" he asked, genuinely desperate. "How can someone redeem themselves from 35 murders?" "Find a true teacher," she replied. "Find someone who can teach you not how to destroy, but how to heal. Not how to take life, but how to give life. Dedicate the rest of your existence to undoing the harm you have done." This conversation planted a seed that would grow to become one of the most extraordinary spiritual transformations in human history. Tenzin spent weeks investigating, asking in the most remote villages, desperately searching for a master who would accept someone with his terrible karma. Many recoiled in horror when they discovered what he had done. "A murderer seeking instruction," some mocked. "The only thing you deserve is punishment, not instruction." Others were more cruel. 35 lives? The karma you have created will follow you for 1,000 lifetimes. There is no teacher in the world who can help you." But Tenzin didn't give up. Something deep within him had awakened, a spiritual thirst even more intense than his former thirst for revenge. He kept searching, traveling through treacherous mountains, braving storms that seemed to try to prevent him from finding redemption. Finally, someone mentioned a name that would make her heart leap with hope: Marpa the translator, a master so wise and compassionate that he was said to be able to purify even the darkest karma. "But," the person warned, "Marpa doesn't accept just anyone as a disciple. He sees right through people's souls. If you're not sincere in your repentance, he will know immediately. Tenzin didn't care. He knew his regret was genuine. It burned in his chest like a constant fire, reminding him every moment of the horror he had committed. The journey to Marpa's home took weeks. When he finally arrived, exhausted and ragged, he found a middle-aged man with eyes that seemed to see not only through him, but through his past and future lives. Tenzin prostrated himself completely on the ground, both in respect and shame. "Master," he said, not daring to raise his face, "I am the worst of human beings. I have killed 35 innocent people with dark magic. I have been begging you, is there any hope of purification for someone like me?" Marpa was silent for a long time, so long that Tenzin began to wonder if his master had simply walked away, unable to bear the presence of so much evil. Finally, Marpa spoke, and his voice had a quality that was simultaneously stern and infinitely compassionate. "Tenzin, get up. Let's talk." Marpa looked deeply into Tenzin's eyes, and what he saw there was extraordinary. Not just regret, many people do when faced with consequences, but a genuine transformation of the soul, a heart that had been completely broken and was ready to be rebuilt in a whole new way. "Tenzin," said Marpa, "your karma is truly terrible. The lives you have taken have created a spiritual debt that would normally take many incarnations to repay." Tenzin's heart sank. He had hoped against hope that maybe, but, Marpa continued, and that single word carried as much weight as a mountain, "I see something in you that is rare. Repentance so deep that it has created an opening for grace. Are you willing to do anything, and I mean anything, to purify your karma?" "Yes, Master," Tenzin replied, without hesitation. "My entire life, every breath, every moment, it is all at your disposal." "Very well," Marpa said with a smile that was both gentle and mysterious. "Then let's start simple. See that mountain over there?" Tenzin looked in the direction indicated. It was a steep, rocky mountain, practically impossible to climb. "I will ask you to build a stone house on top of that mountain. You will carry each stone with your own hands. When you are finished, call me." It seemed an impossible task, but Tenzin simply nodded. "When should I begin, Master?" "Now."
And so began what would be known as the most extraordinary years of spiritual penance in history. Tenzin began carrying stones up the mountain, one by one. His hands bled, his back ached, his feet cut on the sharp rocks. But with each stone he carried, he repeated the names of the 35 people he had killed. For Dolma, who was only 7 years old, he said as he carried one stone. For Tenzin, who would be a father in a few months, as he carried another. Each stone was an act of repentance. Each drop of blood an offering of purification. Each tear that fell as he worked, a prayer for forgiveness. Months passed. Tenzin's body was shriveled with muscle and scars. His hands were calloused like leather. His face was burned by the high-altitude sun. But something deeper was changing. With each day of brutal work, he felt as if layers of dark karma were being peeled from his soul. The visions of the dead that had tormented him began to change. Instead of accusatory looks, he began to see expressions of forgiveness. When he finally finished the first house, he humbly called Marpa. The master came, examined the work, and then said something that devastated Tenzin. "Destroy everything. You built in the wrong place." Any normal person would have exploded in rage. Months of brutal work reduced to nothing. But Tenzin simply nodded and began to destroy everything he had built, stone by stone. "Why aren't you angry?" Marpa asked, watching. "Master," Tenzin replied, "anger is what drove me to kill 35 people. If I have to destroy 1,000 houses to purify that anger, I will do so gratefully." Marpa smiled. It was the first time Tenzin had seen his master truly smile. "Now, build a triangular house on that peak." And Tenzin began again. He carried each stone again. He built with even greater care. And when he finished, destroy everything. It must be round. Once again, destruction. Once again, reconstruction. This went on for years. 9 houses built, 9 houses destroyed. Each a test not only of physical endurance, but of ego death, of soul purification. During these years, something miraculous was happening. Marpa's other disciples received direct spiritual teachings, meditations, philosophy, advanced techniques. Tenzin received only brutal physical labor and commands to destroy what he had built. But Tenzin was learning the most profound lesson of all, the complete death of ego. Every stone carried was a piece of pride destroyed. Every house demolished, a layer of self-pity removed. He was literally rebuilding himself stone by stone into something completely new. After 9 years of tireless work, Tenzin had become unrecognizable, not just physically, though his body was now sculpted by the hardest work imaginable, but spiritually. Where there had once been anger, there was now serenity. Where there had once been wounded pride, there was now genuine humility. One morning, Marpa called to him, "Tenzin, there's something I need to tell you about all these houses." Tenzin's heart sank. What new ordeal awaited him? "Every house you build," Marpa said gently, "was unnecessary for any physical purpose. I made them build and destroy for one reason only, to build you." Tenzin looked confused. "Every stone you carried also carried a part of your dark karma. Every destroyed house also destroyed a layer of ego. Every drop of sweat purified a part of your soul. The work was not to create houses, son. It was to recreate you." Tears began to stream down Tenzin's face, not from sadness, but from a gratitude so deep it seemed to come from lifetimes of suffering finally transformed into light. "And now," Marpa continued, "you are ready for the real teachings." What followed were years of intensive spiritual instruction. But unlike the other disciples, who struggled with ego and resistance, Tenzin absorbed each teaching like a dry sponge absorbs water. His soul had been so thoroughly humbled and purified that there were no barriers to wisdom. He learned meditations that took him to states of consciousness so elevated that they seemed to touch the very fabric of reality. He mastered practices that allowed healing not just of bodies, but of karma. He developed a compassion so profound that he could feel the suffering of all living beings as if it were his own. But most extraordinary of all, he discovered he had a special gift. When he sang spiritual teachings, his voice carried a healing force that could transform not only the listener, but the entire environment around him. It was as if all the tears shed, all the suffering experienced, all the purification achieved had been alchemized into an ability to touch souls in a way that had never been seen before. After years of intensive training, the day arrived that would change not only Tenzin's life, but the spiritual destiny of an entire nation. Marpa summoned him for a final conversation. "Tenzin, your purification is complete. You are no longer the same person who committed those terrible crimes. You have died to who you were and been reborn as something completely new." "But, Master," Tenzin asked, "how can I be sure that my karma has truly been purified?"
Marpa smiled with profound peace. "Tonight, meditate and ask for a vision. If you are truly purified, you will receive direct confirmation." That night, Tenzin meditated more deeply than he had ever meditated before. And then something happened that would change everything. In his vision, he saw the 35 people he had killed. But now, instead of accusatory looks, they all smiled at him with unconditional love. A child he had killed approached and said, "Tenzin, your suffering and repentance liberated us too. Your purification allowed us to be purified too. You didn't kill us, you helped us transcend." One by one, each person he had killed came to him, not to accuse, but to thank him, to explain that their terrible act had been, paradoxically, part of a greater cosmic plan, that their intense suffering had created a purification so powerful that it benefited not only him, but all the souls involved. "Now," said the voice that seemed to come from every direction, "go and use your transformed suffering to heal the suffering of others." When he awoke from his meditation, Tenzin knew his life had taken a completely new direction. He was no longer Tenzin, the repentant murderer. He had become something else entirely, a healer of souls. Tenzin returned to his homeland after more than a decade of absence. But the person he returned to was unrecognizable. Where once there had been a young man consumed by rage, now walked a man radiating serenity. Where once there had been eyes filled with hatred, now shone orbs of infinite compassion. His first stop was the grave of his mother, who had died a few years earlier. He knelt at the simple grave and spoke in a voice cracked with emotion. "Mom, I did it. I found the redemption you said was possible. I'm no longer the person who left here consumed by revenge. I'm someone dedicated entirely to healing human suffering." And then something extraordinary happened. He began to sing, not just words but vibrations that seemed to come from dimensions beyond the physical. His voice carried all the transformed pain, all the alchemized regret, all the love won through the most intense suffering. The people of the nearby village heard this song and felt something they had never experienced before. It was as if each note touched their souls directly, healing wounds they hadn't even known existed. "Who's singing?" they asked each other. "What voice is that makes my heart feel at peace for the first time in years?" When they discovered it was Tenzin, the same Tenzin who had committed that terrible massacre years before, they were initially afraid. How could someone so malevolent have become a source of healing? But her transformation was so obvious, so complete, so genuine, that even the most skeptical began to believe something miraculous had happened. "He's not the same person anymore," they whispered to each other. "It's as if the old person died and someone completely new was born in his body." And they were right. Word of Tenzin spread like wildfire throughout the mountains. People traveled for weeks just to hear his healing songs, and what they found defied all comprehension. When Tenzin sang, miracles happened. People with chronic illnesses were cured. Individuals trapped in deep depression found sudden joy. Families torn apart by hatred were reconciled in a single day. But the most extraordinary were the spiritual healings. People carrying terrible guilt, heavy karma, deep regrets, all found peace when they heard his songs. "How is this possible?" asked a man who had stolen and lied all his life, but felt completely forgiven after hearing Tenzin sing. "How can your music heal wounds I've carried for decades?" Tenzin responded with a wisdom born of lived experience. "Friend, I have carried the heaviest karma possible, 35 murders. If there can be redemption for me, there can be redemption for anyone.
My songs are not just music, they are maps to the transformation I have discovered is possible. He established his residence in a cave high in the mountains, a place so isolated that only the truly dedicated would make the difficult journey to reach it. But they came, hundreds, then thousands, rich and poor, saints and sinners, young and old. They all climbed those treacherous mountains because they knew that at the top they would find something that existed nowhere else, living proof that total transformation was possible. Every person who visited him left changed, not just inspired or motivated, but fundamentally transformed, as if Tenzin's presence activated healing possibilities they didn't even know they possessed. As the years passed, something extraordinary began to happen across Tibet. Tenzin's songs, memorized by those who visited him, began to spread throughout the country, and wherever they were sung, healing followed. It wasn't just the music itself, but the transformative energy it carried. It was as if each song was imbued with Tenzin's own journey, from the deepest abyss of evil to the loftiest heights of holiness. Entire villages that had been divided by generational conflicts reconciled after a night of listening to his songs. Families who hadn't spoken in decades embraced with tears of forgiveness. Criminals turned themselves into the authorities, not out of fear, but out of a genuine awakening of conscience. "It's as if he's found the exact frequency of human healing," said a sage of the time. "His songs don't just touch the ears, they reset the soul."
The Dalai Lama himself sent emissaries to investigate this phenomenon. When they returned, they reported something that left the entire spiritual court in shock. "Your Holiness, we have known many saints and sages, but we have never seen anything like this. This man carries within himself living proof that there is no karma so dark that it cannot be purified, no soul so lost that it cannot find its way back to the light." The Dalai Lama personally decided to make the journey to Tenzin's cave. It was an unprecedented decision. Tibet's highest spiritual leader traveling to meet a former assassin. When the two met, the Dalai Lama looked deeply into Tenzin's eyes and saw something that moved him to tears: absolute purity. Not the purity of someone who had never sinned, but the far rarer purity of someone who had transformed the deepest sin into the highest holiness. "Tenzin," said the Dalai Lama, "you have become something unique in spiritual history. You are proof that the most radical transformation is possible. Your songs must be preserved for all future generations." The last years of Tenzin's life were spent not only healing individuals, but also training disciples who could continue this work of transformation. He carefully chose those who, like himself, had known deep suffering and were genuinely committed to healing. "Listen," he told his disciples, "I do not teach you as saints who have never fallen. I teach you as one who has fallen into the deepest abyss possible and found his way back. This is a different wisdom, more real, more practical, more powerful." His lessons were unique because they came from lived experience. When he spoke about forgiveness, it wasn't theory. He had experienced forgiveness from the very people he had killed. When he taught about transformation, it wasn't philosophy. He himself had transformed from absolute evil to pure goodness. The secret, he revealed to his closest disciples, is not in never falling, but in using the fall as a springboard to jump higher than would otherwise be possible. "My greatest crime has become my greatest strength. My greatest shame has become my greatest source of compassion." When Tenzin felt his death approaching at age 84, He showed no fear or sadness. Instead, there was a radiant serenity, as if he were about to reunite with old friends. His last days were spent singing, not to heal others, but in celebration of a life that had completed the most extraordinary cycle of redemption in human history. On the night of his death, something miraculous happened. People across Tibet reported dreaming of Tenzin singing to them, offering final words of healing and hope. "Remember," his voice echoed in the dreams of thousands, "you are never beyond redemption. Never. No matter what you have done, no matter how far you have fallen, the way back always exists. I am the proof." Today, more than 1,000 years later, Tenzin's songs are still sung in the mountains of Tibet. But more importantly, his story continues to transform lives around the world. In psychiatric hospitals, therapists use his story to show the most desperate patients that radical change is possible. In prisons, chaplains share his journey with inmates who believe they are beyond salvation. In rehabilitation centers, counselors point to her example as proof that no one is lost forever. They say, "Look at Tenzin. If someone who killed 35 innocent people can become a saint revered by millions, what's your excuse for not trying to change?" His story resonates especially in our time, when so many people carry guilt, regret, and feelings of irreparability. Tenzin proves that these beliefs are illusions. Modern neuroscientists study his transformation and discover that the human brain is even more plastic than previously thought. If someone can change so radically, they say, it suggests possibilities for transformation that we are only just beginning to understand. Psychologists point to his journey as the ultimate example of what they call post-traumatic growth. The ability not just to recover from terrible experiences, but to use those experiences to become a fundamentally better person. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of his story is personal. For every person who reads about Tenzin, the same inevitable question arises. If he could change so drastically, what's stopping me from changing too? Tenzin's story isn't just an inspiring tale from the distant past. It's a practical manual for radical transformation available to anyone at any time. Lesson 1. True repentance is the first step. Tenzin didn't just feel bad about what he did. He allowed that regret to transform him completely. How many people say, "I'm sorry," but continue the same patterns? True repentance means being willing to die to who you were and be reborn as something new.
Lesson 2. Accept any purification work. For 9 years, Tenzin carried stones without question, without complaint, without demanding explanations. In our lives, how often do we resist the difficult work necessary for our transformation? How often do we desire change without effort, growth without pain? Lesson 3. Use your greatest pain as your greatest strength. What Tenzin was most ashamed of, his murders, became the source of his greatest compassion. He could heal others because he knew the deepest suffering possible. What is the most painful experience of your life? How can you transform it into a source of healing for others? Lesson 4. Real transformation touches everyone around. When Tenzin genuinely changed, the entire world around him transformed. His songs healed thousands because they stemmed from authentic transformation. Superficial change impresses no one. Deep change transforms nations. Now I ask you directly, what aspects of your life are crying out for radical transformation? What patterns have you been repeating that no longer serve you? What regrets do you carry that could become your greatest source of wisdom? My dear friend, if you've made it this far in this story, it's no accident. Something in you recognizes the profound truth that Tenzin's life represents, that radical change is not only possible, but may be closer than you think. Maybe you're carrying around guilt that seems unforgivable. Maybe you've made mistakes you believe are irreparable. Maybe you feel trapped in patterns that seem impossible to break. Tenzin's story screams a truth that echoes through the centuries. You are not beyond redemption. There is no hole so deep you cannot climb out of. There is no darkness so thick it cannot be transformed into light. But, and this is a crucial but, real transformation requires that you be willing to die to who you've been. Not physical death, but death to the ego, to old patterns, to the limiting stories you tell about yourself. Tenzin spent 9 years carrying stones. What inner work are you willing to do? For how long? With what level of commitment? The difference between people who radically change and people who remain stuck is simple. A willingness to do the work, no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it is. Your transformation exercise. 1. Identify your murder. What's the thing you're most ashamed of? What action, pattern, or aspect of your personality would you like to completely transform? 2. Find your Marpa. Who can help you with this transformation? A therapist, a mentor, a support group, a spiritual practice. Don't try to do it alone. 3. Accept carrying stones. What difficult but necessary work have you been avoiding? What houses do you need to build and destroy to rebuild yourself? 4. Turn wound into medicine. How can your greatest pain become your greatest source of healing for others? Perhaps the most extraordinary story about Tenzin is this. He didn't stop transforming lives after he died. His songs, his story, his living proof that radical change is possible continue to heal people a millennium later. In 2019, a New York man who had lost everything, family, career, health, was on the brink of suicide. On the last night he planned to live, he found Tenzin's story online. Reading about someone who had committed acts far worse than anything he had done, but who had found complete redemption, something shifted. If a murderer can become a saint, perhaps a broken man can become useful again. Today, this man runs a suicide prevention center that has saved hundreds of lives. In 2020, a woman in Brazil who had abandoned her children due to drug addiction heard Tenzin's story. She thought, he killed 35 people and redeemed himself. I only abandoned 2 children. If there's hope for him, there's hope for me. She checked into rehab, completely rebuilt her life, and today not only regained custody of her children, but also works to help other addicted mothers. In 2021, a young man in England who had been sexually abused and was plotting violent revenge against his abuser encountered Tenzin's story. He saw that revenge only multiplies suffering, that personal transformation is more powerful than external destruction. Instead of seeking revenge, he sought therapy, healed his wounds, and today helps other victims of abuse find healing instead of revenge. The story continues. On every continent, people find in Tenzin's journey proof that they are not beyond salvation, no matter what they have done or suffered. And now we come to the most important point of this entire narrative. Because if you truly understood Tenzin's story, you realized that it's not about him. It's about the possibilities that exist within every human being. Every person has the potential for radical change. Every soul carries the seeds of its own redemption. Every life can become a story of transformation that inspires generations. The only question is, will you be willing to do the work? Tenzin showed us that it doesn't matter how low you've fallen. What matters is how high you're willing to climb. It doesn't matter how many mistakes you've made. What matters is how much wisdom you can draw from them. Your past doesn't have to define your future. Your wounds can become your source of healing. Your greatest shame can become your most valuable contribution to the world. But this requires a choice only you can make. A choice that needs to be made not just once, but every day, in every moment when you can choose between remaining who you've always been or becoming who you could be.
Your transformation starts now. Today, take concrete action toward the change your heart most desires. This week, seek professional or spiritual help to support your journey. This month, start using your most painful experience to help someone who is going through something similar. This year, commit to completely transforming at least one fundamental aspect of your life. Remember, Tenzin started out as an assassin and ended up a saint. What will his transformation story be? My dear friend, if this story touched your heart, if something in you recognized the profound truth it represents, then you have already begun your own journey of transformation. Tenzin's story isn't just about a man who lived 1,000 years ago. It's about the potential for holiness that lies within every person listening to me now. It's about the truth that no matter where you are, you can reach places you never imagined possible. If you were touched by this story, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to know that radical transformation is possible. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue discovering life-changing stories. Every person who hears about Tenzin carries within them the seed of the same transformation. You can be the next chapter in this story of redemption that continues through the centuries. Always remember, within you lies both the capacity to create and to destroy, to hurt and to heal, to fall and to rise to the most sublime heights of human experience. The choice is always yours, and it's always possible. Namaste. The saint in me honors the saint in you.